Good morning, Brad Shuck, Dr. Brad Shuck from the
Hey,
University of Louisville. How are you?
I'm
I'm
good. How
good. How
about
about
you
you
this
this
morning?
morning?
Doing
Doing
well?
well?
I'm doing okay here. It's Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. We're in the middle of the pandemic still. And I'm Charley Miller of Unitonomy. And I'm excited to get Brad today to get inside the head and all your
Mm-hmm.
years of research here to talk capacity, employee
Mm-hmm.
capacity and workload and everything that comes with that. How do you define capacity?
So
So
can I
can I
use
use
an
an
analogy?
analogy?
So when I teach class, sometimes we will use the analogy of having I've got this glass here, right? And if you can imagine, I had a second glass, and this glass was totally full, and the second glass was also completely full. And I asked you to pour the water from one glass into the other glass. That's how I would define capacity. When we have reached our limit emotionally, physically, socially, and we are at a point of fatigue, but not quite there yet, where things begin to spill over the sides and we have a difficult time keeping up.
Okay, so cup overfloweth. What are the repercussions when someone is overwhelmed when it comes to work?
Uh, One more time, Charlie, you broke up just a little bit.
What are the things to watch for when someone's cup is
Mhm.
overflowing when they are at capacity?
Frustration. So, what we see as the outcome of being at capacity is frustration. When people become the obstacle to the task. So think about that for a minute. I have to get some stuff done, and there are people who are in my way, taking up my time or taking up space on my calendar or using up resources emotionally or physically or whatever. And I just get really frustrated about that. We might think about this. We talked about being a parent or living alone during the pandemic of the last couple of episodes. And as a parent, folks might relate to, God, I'm just getting a couple of things done. I'm banging out some emails. I'm working on this project really quickly. And my little one comes up and is like, hey, Dad, let's go play. And I go, well, I don't really have time to play today or right now. Daddy's working. And then she goes away. I say, Daddy needs 10 minutes. And so she might go away for what she thinks is 10 minutes, but it's really like 30 seconds. And she comes back to me and she's like, hey, are you ready to play yet? And at that moment we can get really frustrated because our capacities our resources are competing, and in one way we feel like we need to get something done, but there's someone in my way. We see this outcome of frustration happen more often when the pressure is really high and when leadership gets accelerated, and certainly during the COVID crisis, it's been accelerated, and leadership, the need to lead now in a different way is unprecedented.
Okay, and something else I want to talk about here is the opposite of too much to do, which is not enough. I remember my first job out of college. I worked for the San Francisco Giants baseball team, kind of checking a bucket list item of wanting to work in baseball. I wish I could say I was the third baseman, but I wasn't. I was doing manual labor inside the stadium, just helping them figure out how to make money on non-game days, for lack of a better way of explaining that. But it was a really fun job. I got to be outside a lot, and every day was a different day based on whatever was happening in the stadium. But you know what? They didn't really know how to use me well. Here I am as a college graduate, often doing manual labor and stuff, but on top of some problem solving here and there. And I was bored. And that was a different kind of frustration. And I remember, I kind of did this like 6 months there and enjoyed it, but I was, making minimum wage and was ready to move on to something more fulfilling. And I remember I really enjoyed the people I worked with. And I remember them saying as I left, like, you know what, we're probably not going to be able to replace you with another college graduate, are we? And I was like, no, you're. So that's just a quick story to say, like, there is another problem here. When people don't have enough work that challenges them, that's a problem. I know from my game design background, when you're making a game, There's something called the flow state that people try to design for. And the idea of the flow state is trying to match challenge versus ability. You always want to make the challenge a little bit above someone's ability so that they're learning and they're engaged through the difficulty of solving the game system. If you don't have enough challenge, players get bored very quickly. If it's too challenging, they get very frustrated. This sounds a lot like what you're describing with capacity in the workplace.
Yeah, and it's some of the principles of engagement, right? So when we don't see meaning in something, we have a tendency to kind of back away from it, whether that's game design or working, doing manual labor in a really cool place, right? Like working for the San Francisco Giants is cool, man. That's a really cool thing. But it quickly lost its meaning because you were underutilized in your ability to do work that you felt like was kind of meaningful, and so we tend to push away from that as well. And we get frustrated about that. We get bored really really quickly, no doubt.
Okay, so next question I have for you is what should an employee do when they've got a manager doing what I call the pylon, which is you come in on Monday, hey, I need this and this and this week. Okay, great. I'll go crank this out. You come in Tuesday, oh, here are two more things I need to do. And next thing you know, there's this cadence of always just more and more and more. How does someone manage that?
So there's a distinction I think we need to make, and that is the difference between leading or managing now, and the difference between leading in a crisis or managing in a crisis. And those two things are a little bit different. It's really easy to lead when things are going really well, right? I can just kind of show up, couple meetings, I do this, shake a couple hands, high five, you're doing great, thanks for all you do. But leading in a crisis requires a different skill set, and that's because it accelerates the need for really good leadership in a short amount of time. So we might think of like the way that the leadership need is compressed, and that accelerates the growth and the need, but it immediately diminishes a leader's capacity. The reason for that is things begin to feel a little bit out of control. And so what I recommend, if things we're kind of having the pylon effect here, and that can happen. We might think of that as rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. So I was talking with a colleague of mine who is to be honest with you, he's a world-renowned epidemiologist. He's an infectious disease doc here in town. He is the guy that I want to get my information from. And we were talking about historical leadership, and are there times in history where we've had really great leaders who have led during crises, and are there principles that they've used across that we can now glean some insights from about that kind of work. We talked a lot about trust, we talked a lot about routines, and we talked a lot about how we communicate in calm and predictable ways, and how we point folks to the mission and then inspire. And that's when we talk about leading with people and then inspiring to the task. That's exactly what we're talking about. It is as someone who is in the midst of this, even if we might take a family context, for example, right? We get some information, it feels out of control. I want to control the things that I can control because that helps me feel comfortable. That's people start panic buying then, right? Well, I'm going to go buy all of the ramen noodles in the Kroger aisle. And then you look back on that, you're like, why did I buy all the ramen noodles? Well, in the moment, it helped you feel kind of in control and comfortable. When we're leaders and we're leading organizations, when we're changing the plans on a daily basis, that's not building capacity for our teams. That's actually depleting the capacity. And so we have to resist the need to micro lead or micro manage. The way we do that is we plan for the long term and we execute in the short term. So we might think about outcomes, right? So we might think about, all right, well, what is it that I'm actually asking? What do we need to get done? What's the goal here? And then allowing our teams, trusting our teams to be able to go and do those things. And then coming back to us to make recommendations or to present a plan or whatever that might be. But when we micro lead or we micro manage, we're depleting the emotional and the social capacity of our teams in the moment. And those things become cumulative over time. So eventually, work that was once really meaningful and exciting and something I was really excited about and sold out to doing becomes kind of tiresome and meaningless, and eventually becomes very disengaging. You mute. Oh yeah.
Uh, I'm going to plug a book here that influenced me here. Brave New Work by Aaron Dignan, um, which is really about how can leaders of organizations develop autonomy within employee roles. Because if you do that well, you have a culture that scales and you have a culture where people are high performing. Easier said than done. And the book is a nice book that gives real advice on how to do it. It has been an influence on Unitonomy. Obviously, our name is Unity and Autonomy, so autonomy is a big piece of what we think about. There is this tension between micromanaging and providing autonomy. You provide too much autonomy, and then you have alignment problems. Or maybe if you don't apply autonomy in the right way, you have alignment problems. If you micromanage too much, where you're just driving alignment and staying on top of everyone, then you just have unhappy people, low morale, you have people leaving, you have low productivity. There is a balance between these two things of making sure there is healthy guidance, really good communication, putting structure around it, making sure people know their mission and purpose, back to what you were saying, so that people can be empowered to make decisions and move quickly. And it's, again, like most of the things related to talking about collaboration and culture, it's always easier said than practiced. But hopefully people are listening to you and your research, Brad, so that there are some ideas here to take back and use and develop those leadership muscles and muscles that we all need as colleagues to be good collaborators and communicators. Next thing I want to ask you about is this idea of something Martin Lowe says. Martin often joins us on the show with On Plan Consulting. I think it's not original Martin quote, but I attribute it to him because he's the first person I ever heard say it. People join companies, but they leave managers.
Yeah.
This is a pre-pandemic thing here, where you get really excited about this new job and what this company is about, and the work that it's going to provide, only to find months into it, wow, I've got a manager here that is not a great manager. They're making life not great for me. And you start looking for the next thing already. You're not even there a year and you want to get out of there because your manager just doesn't know what he or she's really doing. And you can't really blame all these managers. Most people are just not trained or set up for success as a manager. They're just kind of thrown in that role and figuring they'll learn as they go. And the only way one manager becomes a good manager is if that person had previously a good manager and was able to learn from the practices of good management. It's a bit haphazard, right? So I think a lot of what consultants can do is go in and help people become better managers. So in that idea here of bad managers, what can an employee do to just subtly give some feedback up the chain, specifically to that manager, so that they can become a better manager? Any ideas?
Yeah, so I totally agree with Martin here, and the research would suggest that there's about a 60% drop off from day one to the start of someone's 6 month mark in a company in terms of their levels of engagement. So that's pretty significant, right? That's a thing about if I was disengaged. Or I was only engaged 40% of the time that I was working with the company, or only engaged 40% of the time of my family. In any other realm of my life, that would not be a very successful mark of collaboration or productivity or anything like that. So I think Martin's really right. The research is also pretty clear that managers make a huge difference here. Leaders make a big difference. And we're using the word manager and leader pretty simultaneously here, and there's distinctions between those, and we can certainly get into those on a different show. But I want to make sure that we're thinking about the people who are communicating and talking directly to our employee teams and our employee bases. So what do you do about that? The first thing is where you can, a little grace and assuming the best goes a long way. I've been on a couple conference calls already this morning, and thankfully I work for terrific folks. I mean, the people who are in my chain of command, who are above me, are elite of the elite. They're the best. We all can get really frustrated sometimes, though. And so what do we do when that happens? One of them is to assume that we that somebody's coming from the best place that they can right now. There are many, many things that are going on in our lives that right now are just day to day unpredictable. That creates a little bit of chaos and it creates a little bit of that frustration. So if you see that, you might give a little bit of grace. The second thing is to check in. How are you doing? What's going on? What I find is sometimes leaders need a confidant. They need somebody that they can talk to that's not going to react, that's not going to go off the cliff, and that they're going to keep that information confidential, so that someone has a board to bounce ideas off of. The third is to manage up a little bit, and the way that I like to do that is I like from my teams who are above me to know what I've got going on, and to send some bright spots. Right now, some bright spots are hard to find in organizations, and so if you can find some bright spots to share, that would be a really good thing. I would recommend that. And the fourth thing would be to just connect with your team and the community around you. I think this idea of predictable, calm communication, I think routines and rhythms and rituals are really, really important, and establishing those things from a personal standpoint. But here's one other piece of advice. Before I looked to my leader to give some advice up the chain of command, I would really encourage all of us to take a personal look at the things that we're doing. Do I have these things in place? Am I communicating in a calm and predictable way? Am I focused in on my routines and my rituals? Am I doing what I'm asking other people to do? I think that's a really good introspective question we can think about, and it helps self-awareness. I heard somebody say the other day two things. One, historical models of leadership are built on experience. And so people will get into leadership positions because they have the experience to lead. They've done this before. Man, I don't know anybody that's led during a pandemic. I just don't. Nobody here is really equipped for that in terms of experience. And so we're all kind of flying by the day to day and by the seat of our pants in some ways. And the other thing is we have the hardware, right? You and I, the folks who are listening, the folks who may read the transcript on the Unitonomy blog, man, we've got the hardware. We've got the mind to do this. We've got the heart to lead with empathy and compassion. It's not the hardware, it's the software. And so sometimes we've got to upgrade that software. We've got to tweak the code in that software. And we've got to retool in some really small ways that make a huge, huge difference in the way that our hardware gets used. And so for us, we're good. The hardware is here. It really is working on the inside out and then helping our teams be the best that they can.
And when there's a time for the literal software, you can look at unitonomy.com.
No doubt.
I think a good place to end is coming back to the glass you were talking about earlier. There's a famous Buddhist teaching, which is to say, when you hold up a glass of water for long enough, it becomes very heavy. And you can run this experiment at home. Pick up a glass of water and try to hold it for 5 minutes. Your arm will be starting to shake after 5 minutes, right? But if you just put it down for 10 seconds and then pick it back up again, it's light again. I think everyone, when they feel overwhelmed, if it's their work as a capacity or if it's even something else in life, if you can develop a habit of knowing how to put things down, get your mind off of it, and then come back to it, that alone will just bring down the tension and the frustrations you feel for you to manage. Any last thoughts on your side, Brad?
I think the final thoughts, I continue to think about the people who go to work every day who are essential and the capacity that they're at. You see it on interviews and on TV and the internet and different stories, and man, my heart goes out to those folks, and I just pray over those folks that they're going to be okay, and that they've got places where they can go and take a break for 5 to 10 minutes to put that glass of water down. I can't imagine. So I think about this idea of capacity and leadership and accelerating and the pressure, and I just cannot shake the folks who are on the front lines today, keeping our nation and our state rocking.
Yeah, love to all the medical workers around the world that are saving people. But oh my gosh, talk about capacity. They are obviously overwhelmed, and puts everything in perspective for the rest of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Brad, thank you so much for this conversation. That was awesome. And we'll do this again tomorrow. Cheers, my man.
See you guys.
Thank you.